My name is Issac Hale. I'm a political scientist at the University of California, Davis, and I do a lot of research in campaigns and elections, including here in California.
Must be a really exciting time for you, especially with this 2020 presidential election really ramping up.
And it keeps the undergraduates excited, which makes me excited.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, the big question that everybody seems to have right now is why is the California primary so important this year?
Yeah, well, as you know, the California primary this year is happening in March on Super Tuesday instead of when it usually happens in June. And so this is very exciting for a lot of Californians. The last time we had a contested presidential primary here in California was 2008. And so for the first time in a long time, California is going to make a really big difference in a very contentious, uncertain primary. And California has a lot of delegates at stake. California has 500 delegates just by itself, and by contrast, only 64 delegates have been allocated so far in Iowa and New Hampshire. So California is set to have a huge impact on the primary contest.
California's primary was moved up from June now to March. In terms of the calendar, why does the exact positioning of California having their primary in March make a difference?
Well, we can think back to 2016 when there was that incredibly contentious primary between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, right? That was something that a lot of people were very excited and interested in, but by the time it got to California in June, the race had already been decided. And we can think the same thing was true on the Republican side, right? By the time it got to California, Donald Trump was already the nominee. Right? So this effort to move the California primary to March is an attempt to make the California primary relevant again, right? Have our say before the contest has already been decided. Now, ironically, this year, it seems like this Democratic primary may go all the way to the convention. So that being the case, maybe we would have still mattered had we had the primary in June. But as a general rule of thumb, having our primary earlier in the year is absolutely going to make California more relevant going forwards.
With the number of folks that are still in this election or still campaigning for this election, do you think that that California could make or break any of these candidates in March?
Absolutely. So as I said, about a third of the delegates are up for the total delegates in the Democratic primary are up for grabs on Super Tuesday, and about a third of that third are up for grabs in California. Right, there are a bunch of big states up for play on Super Tuesday, including California, Texas, and Virginia. But California is by far the biggest prize. And now I imagine some of the top candidates who have a lot of money to spare, right, and maybe are going to stick it out to the end, people like Bernie Sanders or Michael Bloomberg, they will probably continue on no matter what happens on Super Tuesday. We can imagine they'll probably be netting a fair amount of delegates. For some candidates who have maybe been struggling, particularly financially, and maybe flagging in some of the early contests as well, think about candidates like Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden, I can imagine that a poor Super Tuesday performance, particularly in California, could sink their campaigns.
Very important then, it looks like. We'll have to be watching in the next couple of months. Let's talk about that last minute bill, SB 207, here in California that would allow voters to change their party registration within 2 weeks of an election. It's really only moving it up one day, but if that bill gets any traction, if it passes, any effect on the primary coming up?
Well, there's actually been a lot of political science research showing that allowing voters to change their registration closer to the election day does increase turnout. That's an effect they see in Wisconsin, and that's especially a powerful effect when same-day voter registration is allowed. Now, of course, that's not what SB 207 is actually advocating and would actually cause, but we would imagine that any increase in the amount of, any attempt to make it easier for voters to change their registration closer to the primary date should increase turnout at least a little bit. Of course, it's important to remember in California, if you're registered as no party preference, you can still vote in the Democratic presidential primary as long as you request a Democratic ballot ahead of time. That's not true on the Republican side, so that's just something to keep in mind.
Very interesting. Let's see, what next?
Do you think that this would have any greater impact on independents, independent voters?
Yeah. So again, if you are a third party voter, this is something that you should absolutely keep in mind. If you want to vote in either the Democratic or Republican primary, you should go ahead and change your registration to be a Republican or Democrat. Although, if you are registered no party preference, specifically no party preference, you are eligible to vote in the Democratic primary, provided you request a Democratic ballot ahead of time. That's not true on the Republican side, but again, if you wish to participate in those primaries and you're a third party voter, you've still got the chance. You've still got time.
Do you think that those independent voters have a significant role in this election, and specifically in this primary?
Absolutely. And no party preference voters are a really large part of the California electorate. And they tend to lean Democratic, so we should especially expect a lot of them to be participating in this upcoming primary. We've seen in some of the previous contests, and we saw especially in 2016, that Bernie Sanders really appealed to those independent voters, and that Sanders is currently leading in the polls here in California. So I think we should really keep an eye on how he does in California to see if that strength of independence holds.
We've already seen candidates like Pete Buttigieg, Bernie Sanders, Mike Bloomberg campaigning in the Sacramento area. As we get closer to March, as we get closer to this primary, do you expect to see big name candidates coming to our region and coming to California to sway voters?
Absolutely. They all will be here. California is the big prize, and I think you can especially expect in large urban areas, think of the Los Angeles area, the San Diego area, the San Francisco Bay Area, that these candidates will all be coming through and rallying and trying to turn out their voters. Usually, with the June primary, California candidates are just coming to California to do fundraisers, right? Go to Hollywood, go to Silicon Valley. But this time around, they're absolutely going to be hitting the campaign trail, and I think you can expect to see them everywhere, not just on TV.
Well, let's talk about some of the hot button issues that are important to California voters, and what issues will candidates have to really nail on the head to get the primary vote in March?
So some of the same issues that Democratic voters everywhere are concerned about matter here too in California. First and foremost, beating President Donald Trump is something that's very much on the forefront of Democratic voters' minds. It used to be the common wisdom before Iowa and New Hampshire that former Vice President Joe Biden was best positioned to do that, but that seems to be very much upended after the first couple contests, and it seems very much an open question which of the candidates is best positioned to take on the president. In terms of other issues that voters are concerned about, one thing that's absolutely the top of voters' minds here in California is housing and homelessness. And there was a poll that came out from USC just the other day showing that housing and homelessness is the top issue for California voters. And so I think candidates that have emphasized their housing plans, including Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, will absolutely be continuing to highlight their plans for addressing housing, which I think we can all agree is a huge issue here in California.
Lawmakers in 2017 decided to move the primary up, but could that come to bite us in the butt on the tail end of this primary?
That's the funny thing, right? I would say under almost any circumstances, California would be way more important with this move, being in March, being in Super Tuesday. However, because this race may go all the way to the convention, and in fact, those people over 538 currently predict that this could go all the way to the convention. If that's the case, well, if California were still in June, maybe we'd be playing Kingmaker at the end of it. But as it is, we're one of 18 states that's going to be casting their votes on Super Tuesday. And we may not be Kingmaker, but we'll be the biggest prize.
Anything that we haven't gone over, anything that you'd like to chat about?
I guess the only thing I would add is that California is an incredibly expensive place to campaign. Organizing and doing television advertising and even mail advertising is incredibly expensive here in California, not just because of how many people there are, but of how expensive the media markets are. So I think this is a place where you'll see that candidates who have a lot of financial resources coming in, people like Michael Bloomberg, Pete Buttigieg, and Bernie Sanders, are going to maybe see a real advantage in the campaign process.
Issac Hale, political scientist with UC Davis, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to see what happens.
Indeed.